Welcome to the 43rd video in the Just In Case series, sponsored by Quality and Equality, an OD consultancy firm based in Oxford, United Kingdom. We call it Just In Case, is just in case you need refreshing or learn something new or be reminded of something. Today, I'm very excited to welcome the contributor, Ola Lagunju, who is a very well-known and very experienced OD consultant specializing in a number of areas in OD like human culture change, inclusion, action inquiry, system thinking, human system dynamics. Her wide range of knowledge and her education can be read at the end of the video. Ola has over 20 years, more than 20 years working in the corporate world and hold various senior roles, including head of learning and organization development for a very large global retail organization. And since founding her own company called New Chapter in 2013, and Ola has worked with organization individuals across a broad range of sectors. And recent clients include UBS, Starbucks, BP, NHS, the Civil Service, European Commission, The Guardian, HSBC, etc., etc. But today I got very excited because Ola is delivering to us an incredible, practical, and insightful presentation on simple ways that we can start the inclusion conversation with teams, with organizations, with clients that we serve. She provides examples of the intervention that she used and walk us through how we can best use our simple approach, but of course it's not that simple, but unique approach to get the client to start talking without being defensive about the way they think and do in the realm of inclusion. So Ola's energy and insight serve as a very important reminder to all of us that OD practitioner, that we must constantly do our own work. And also in all that we do as OD practitioner, inclusion and diversity and equality are really part and parcel of our work because we have that deep humanistic history in our profession. So Ola, over to you because I don't want to take any more time. And thank you for spending the time to share your insight with us.
Thank you, Mayanne. And welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Ola, as Mayanne said. And welcome to this Just In Case video, which is all about finding simple ways to start the inclusion conversation. Now, the idea behind this video and the concept behind the video came from a question that I'm often asked by leaders or practitioners who may be new to this work of diversity and inclusion, or even advocates who are looking to really create environments or cultures that are inclusive. The question I often get asked is, Ola, where do I start? Or where do we start? And what I tend to normally do is I go into this inspirational talk of just start anywhere, lean into the mess, just begin, because that's the starting place. And then I just notice there's like a blank stare on their face, or there's even more of a worried look. And they ask me the question again, yes, but where do I start? So I kind of thought I would just create this short video to share with you 4 ways that I use to kickstart this inclusion conversation in organizations or teams or even with pairs. And I describe them as just simple ways, creative, but they just are conversation starters. And I'm going to share them in no particular order. None are better than the other. They're just useful first steps to invite people into the journey of inquiry around this. Your choice in how you use them and which ones you use will be dependent on your style. Like, for example, my style of doing diversity and inclusion work is very conversational. It's all about inquiry. It's all about listening. So these really fit with how I like to approach it and just seem to invite people in rather than going in and tell. But you find what works for your style and what fits the context you're working in, and also really fits or is aligned with what's happening in real time within that system or that team. So again, you can just juggle them. You might use all of them, you might use none of them, you might use a combination of them. That's your choice. But as I said, they're simple ideas that can be used at any level within the system. to build momentum, start there, and then you could build on that. And, as I said, they just are used to generate ripples to get started. And why that is so important is this inclusion work it's a long journey. It's not a one-off that's done and ticked. So it's so important that people really get that the inclusion conversation, whether it be within an organization or a team or a community, it's never done. It's not a problem that can just be fixed. It's like a reality, a continuous experience to be lived. Mentors along the way, as I've developed and done work in this area, have always said to me, it's like having it be like a mountain with no top. So you're constantly climbing, but each step you take actually has an impact and changes an experience of how someone might feel like they're seen and heard. So it's definitely worth constantly climbing that mountain. So you got to pace yourself, and that's why these are like conversational starters that could really help you in, and then help the system or the team take it from there to continue the work. So all these things really require you to start with where the energy is, find your style, and experiment and see what you learn from it. So the first of the four that I want to share with you is what I call, what does inclusion really mean around here? And I mean really mean around here. And this is about, wherever you're entering into the system or a team or with pairs, it's getting people to discover, or getting people to step into a discovery or an inquiry about what inclusion means to them. Sometimes it's like people say, we want this inclusion culture, or we want inclusion, but what does it really mean? And it's almost like starting by getting people to define, what's your definition of inclusion? How do we define it here? And it's almost like exploring, and it is exploring the collective meaning held by that team or that system or whoever's stepping into this. And always by exploring or uncovering that definition, it tells you a lot about where they might be starting. It also tells you a lot about, what they might be up for. But for some, just stopping and doing that definition can be a completely new conversation. So that's why I said these things are like starters, like, oh, I hadn't discovered that before, but it might then engender curiosity and real energy to explore it further. For example, I had a client who, when I asked that question, their reply was, to us, inclusion is harmony and understanding. So with that, we could just step back and say, okay, let's look at that definition. How does it serve? How does it hinder? Even what are some of the simple rules that keep that in place? And is it delivering what you want to then see in inclusion? And what they started to notice was the harmony piece was stopping or wasn't allowing difference to be expressed, because it's like it needs to be harmonious. So they were able to shape that to find a definition that was going to work. So then once they've started to surface what their definition is, it's then asking the question, okay, so that's what it is right now. But the next question is, how do we want to define inclusion around here? And why? What definition will serve us? What definition will fit and forward our strategic intention? What definition will fit and forward what we want to see for our people, or what we want our people to experience while they're with us? So it's like, what's there already? And some people are not even aware that there is a definition. Sometimes it's what I call the hidden definition. Once it's surfaced, then you can start with, okay, what would you want to define it as? And it provides, as I said before, an opening. And then from that, you can build, because if you are then saying that's what inclusion is, or that's what our definition is, all other processes, all other ways of working can be molded around that, and it can be used to shape it. Now, some people say to me, okay, so give me some ideas of what definitions are out there. And there are loads. You could go and Google and loads will come up, but it's finding one that's going to work for you. So there's never a right or wrong one. It's about fit. It's about service of the intention of what you want to create. But I also like to put the element of it's like instructional, I love those kind of definitions that tell you the what within it already. It's like, this is what good looks like. And also kind of serve as a declaration, like a stake in the ground to say, this is us. This is who we want to be. This is what inclusion is. So I just want to share with you a couple of definitions that I like. So there's, for me, inclusion is It's a felt sense of being seen and heard. And it took me a while to get to be with that one, because I would start with, normally it's a process of them, things work, but for me deep down it really is a felt sense of being seen and heard. Another definition that I really love is by from Judith Katz and Fred Miller, which is ensuring people feel they belong. Feeling a level of supportive energy and commitment from others so you and they can do their best work. Another one, if you want more of a one that's got even more of a, what I call business speak within it, is inclusion is about inclusion is about how we structure our organizations, workplaces and processes and the work we do and our meetings, our interactions, so that people can work and participate equitably. So again, there's no one definition, but what's the one that's going to fit what you need and what engenders people to get on board and actually take it? For me, mine is a felt sense of being seen and heard. I think that's what drives me in all the D&I work and diversity and inclusion work that I do. It's how do you create spaces within organizations, systems, communities where people feel that real felt sense of being seen and heard. So that, again, really just explore that definition for you. But then once you've got the definition, there's another layer to this. So now you've got the what. If you think about the work of human system dynamics, and Glenda Young's always talks about, you've got your what, but now you can step into the so what and the now what. You know, it's almost like the so what behind that definition. How does inclusion actually then get created? And that's another conversation that you want to spark with people. And again, I've found whenever I've kind of started with the definition, then we can move into the how. People really get where this might be going. Sometimes we start with the how are we going to include it, but we haven't defined the what. So in terms of exploring how inclusion is created, there's so many different schools of thought out there and different people have different ways of describing it. The one that I love is the model that Linshore and her colleagues use within one of their papers, which is a model of inclusion that really, for me, just opens up another level of deeper understanding and exploration. So I'm just going to share that with you. So it's a 2x4. You know, we like our 2x4 framework, 2x2 frameworks. And on the top axis, it's high belonging, it's belonging, and down the side, it's uniqueness. So what they espouse is, or what they say is, the purpose that that inclusion, people experience that sense of felt inclusion when people are able to experience both uniqueness and belonging simultaneously. Let me just say that again. So people feel like they're included when they feel they've been able to express or their uniqueness is valued and they have a sense of belonging. If they can experience those simultaneously, then there's a feeling of belonging. But what I love about the 2x2 grid is it's almost like saying, well, if someone experiences that their uniqueness or their difference isn't valued and they don't have a sense of belonging, so there's low belongingness, I love that word, belongingness, then they feel excluded. Or another way could be, let's say they feel that their uniqueness is valued because maybe they bring something very unique to the team that isn't there. So maybe they have a highly technical skill that isn't available in any other part of that team. But their uniqueness is valued, but they still don't feel like they belong. Then they feel differentiated. And we call that differentiation in this model, a Linshore model. So again, what you've got here is uniqueness has been met, but belonging hasn't been met. So it results in differentiatedness. Another part of the model is where they talk about when someone feels that they really belong, but they can only belong if they've toned down their uniqueness. That's what we talk about when people feel like they've been assimilated. High belonging, but low value is placed on their uniqueness and difference. And I just love this model because it just brings it alive. But what they then say is the final box on this, as you can see down there in the green box, is when the need for uniqueness and belonging is met, then the individual feels seen and feels included. So this is from one of their papers on inclusion and diversity in work groups, review and a model for future research. And we'll put the link in there because I think it's just such a rich paper. And it really shaped how I started talking about inclusion within organizations. So this model for me has been really useful just to just to provide language, but also I call like a third point to sit down with clients and explore. So, when you look at this, what type of inclusion do you want to create? It's easy to create the assimilation because people feel like they belong, but as long as they fit in with the way things are done around here. But are you really up and ready for what it would mean to allow and value someone's uniqueness and their difference and still ensure they feel like they belong? So this model just gives you a chance to step back and ask, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And what will it take? I also use this on a one-to-one as a model to say, in your experience, how do you normally find yourself within teams or within this organization? And the sad thing is people normally find themselves in either the differentiated or the assimilated. My own personal experience, I came up through corporate life and even stepping into senior leadership. But when I look back, when I first came across this model, I really got that actually a lot of what I was doing was in the box of being assimilated, toning down my difference to fit in. So I belonged and I'd been there for years, but the difference had been tuned out. And as I started to tune it back up, that sense of feeling unleashed, but also no longer fitting. So then it was time to move on. But that's another story. We can do that in video part 2. So then, this model is just used for, as I said, I'll put the link to the article in the at the end of the video. So you've just looked at the what. What is the definition of inclusion? How does it get created? Now you need to move people into the so what. And if people have used that model to say, actually, that's the box we want to get to is inclusion, then you can start asking some of the challenging questions around, okay, so how much inclusion are you really willing to allow? What might you need to give up or let go to really have something happen? Some people say, an example I give to people is, if you really want to include more uniqueness and have belonging as well, you're going to have messier meetings. You're going to have messier processes. You're going to have people really challenging. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to step into that? One of the questions I ask is, how brave do you want to be with this? How uncomfortable are you willing to get? Because this isn't comfortable. Because you're dealing with, something that really, all your senses will be saying, this is different, or, this needs to fit. Letting go of that control. But again, I use questions like this just to see where they are and where they're ready to take the next step. Because sometimes you can't go in and say they should be here. It's like, where are they? And what's the next step they're willing to say? I say to some of my clients, inclusion has consequences, but the consequences are worth it because you are really creating spaces for humans to show up. If you really want to access the talent, the potential, and the wisdom of the diversity that you fought hard to create, recruit, or nurture, then it takes doing this kind of work. This is what has the diversity and the difference flourish and really make a difference. So, definition, what does inclusion mean? What does it really mean around here? Definition and exploring how it gets created. That's the first one. So this one is, what I'm calling it here is listening to include. So another simple way to start is to begin at a micro behavioral level. So it's like taking a core small behavior that if it's in place or you enhanced or you dialed up, it would encourage more inclusion. And it's turning that up even more. It might be encourage more inclusion within a relationship, a team, within the system. I often find that this approach, because it's stepping or working with behaviors, a core behavior, and it's small enough, people are normally willing to engage in this. And there's a little less resistance because it's like a skill. Okay, it's a skill or it's a behavior. I can focus on that. I can't take on this whole big mountain without a top inclusion thing, but I can start with one behavior. So one of the core skills that I often choose is listening. Remember I said to you, my style in doing this D&I work is really from a space of listening to see what's there, listening to include, and encouraging others to do it. So this is really my curiosity and my future work and research that I want to do. I really believe that listening can be a key to create an inclusive cultures, but I'll tell you more about that later. Anyway, so you may choose a different skill. You could use inquiry, you could use questioning, you could use empathy. What's the one that if you put that in place, it will just encourage people to be more curious about the other and invite them in and include them, but also really pay attention to what they might need. So it's the intervention here is linking listening to inclusion. So it's almost like listening to include and using that as the header or the banner or the thing to spark the inquiry about how people might build inclusion within. So rather than starting with inclusion, you're starting with the behaviour, but it's driving inclusion. An example of that, so it's almost one of the things we had was listening to include better. So I had one client where they really liked this idea, and we created a series of conversations and mini development events about building listening skills or building the willingness to listen to include. And we had like a whole month of listening and listening to include month, many projects. We appointed chief listening officers, you know, and what the result of this was we transformed how people interact with each other and transformed how their meetings were designed, because what was foreground for them was asking, how do we create this intervention or this meeting so that we are including? How are we listening to include within this meeting? So it's part of the design. And, you know, when I look back, some of the questions that people started to ask that they had never asked before were things like, because they were really focused on the whole listening skill, and we did a whole lot of work around what does it mean to listen and what does it mean to listen to include, and people could really step that next step up. But the kind of questions we gave them to start thinking and all experimenting with is, you know, at the end of a meeting or during a meeting or in any interaction, be asking things like, what does being heard mean to you? Where do you experience being heard? Where do you have to fight to be heard? Or where did you have to fight to be heard in that meeting? Or even ending someone sharing something and asking, rather than jumping in and adding your piece, but asking the next question, what else would you like heard? And as I said, you know, people were asking questions like, how does this structure, this meeting, this process help or hinder us, or help or hinder our willingness to listen to include? So it's just tying something together. And like I said, these are really simple things, but the impact is when you join them together, it's like a mashup and it gives you something different. And I believe as practitioners, we have a role to role model this in every interaction. Even as I go into a system or any intervention I design, how am I ensuring that it's upping the level of listening and that impacts on the way people might include? There's a quote that I like that kind of got me into this idea was, you hear what you listen for. So then I asked, why not practice listening for inclusion? And have that be a discovery. And what I like about this is there's no one way. But if people can hold on to that concept, they will find their expression of it, rather than you tell people to do A, B, and C. It's like they're just really curious. What would that look like? What would it mean? But also what was powerful when we did it with this particular client was people said, I felt heard. Or when someone asked me that question, what else would you like to be heard? It was like such a shock, like, normally I've spoken and someone else has jumped in. It's like, oh. So people had that experience of what it's like to be heard. So they were willing to go and do it more for others. So this is something about keeping it simple, keeping it something that people can experiment with, having a packaging or a header. So imagine the listening to include week, you know, or the month or the session, just packaging it well that people can then, or I use the word, go play with it or experiment and see what they learn. And then from that, they can make conclusions of what they might try again. I sometimes think of this as doing the inclusion conversation by stealth mode. You know, link a common behaviour to a bigger intention and invite people to try and see what it opens up. So again, it's just something that you could explore. It's just something I found that really worked. And I have 3 clients who are still doing this within their system because the simplicity of it. Number 3 is about getting curious about our inclusion contracts. Now, some people say, what do you mean by that? So I believe that every individual, team, organisation has a pre-written invisible inclusion contract. It's there. You know, if we could see it and we physically had it, it will have, I will include when, or I will include if, or I will always include or exclude this difference, whether it be voice, skin tone, color, accent, idea, or I will always listen to or not listen to. So it's almost as a contract that it's just been written. Now, we all know this stems from our lived experience, our upbringing, our education, our work experience. You know, it's shaped from the biases that often shape and sometimes run our life and our behaviors. But I really hold it as there's a contract. And, you know, we get people to say, you know, what would be on that? What would be on your contract? People are like, what do you mean? But just starting that exploration and helping people see that we all have those contracts, but getting almost like taking ownership for that contract rather than it's just running, just kind of frees people up to explore further. You know, it's asking when people start to look at their contract and discover what's on there, like you're starting to ask, okay, what on this contract helps and hinders me? What would others say is on my contract? You know, again, sometimes we can't see what we can't see, that blind spot. It's about just engaging with people and exploring about trying to identify what's on your contract, and then getting people to experiment with drawing up a different contract. I say to people, right, we're just giving you some time with a lawyer now, and you're going to sit down with this lawyer and together you're going to construct a new contract. Now you're paying for that. So you're going to be really clear what you want that lawyer to do, because we know that's not going to be a cheap, they charge so much. So how do you really make use of that time, and how do you really create a contract that's going to work for you and work for others? With this contract piece, I would say start with yourself first. Be prepared to be surprised. When I first did it, the things I started to discover, like for example, I had on my contract, I will exclude when I hear a particular accent. There was one particular accent that really, whenever it would kick in, it'd be like, I would literally almost like physically churn my body to exclude as well as exclude my listening. Another one that I discovered, which is not rational, so I must say, that's what I say, be prepared to be surprised. You may discover things in your contract that you're like, where did that come from? I realized that I exclude when I see things like white socks with sandals. What does that mean? That's what I said. It's not rational, but be willing to be compassionate, curious, and then ask yourself, what do I want to create this contract with? Sit down with that lawyer and redraft it. You know, and you can do that by finding out, you can really do that by honing your noticing skills. Another thing you could do is, I remember when I was starting to discover my contract was, I did the Harvard Implicit Association Test. It's called the IAT. And that really helped me see some of the unconscious biases or some of the mental models that I see the world through. And I was realizing, wow, that would be on my contract. That's on my contract. I didn't see that. So again, do it as an exploration to see what's on your contracts. It's already running. Then the next stage is rewrite it. But rewrite it with compassion, intention, probably linking it back to the definition that you said inclusion was for you. So again, explore and see what opens up. So the fourth thing I want to share with you is it's all about the concept of starting with what's working. Now, I usually find that the approach that is often used, or the approach that people expect me to use or normally welcome, is starting with trying to identify what's wrong, what needs fixing, what's broken, or finding all the places where inclusion is not happening. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but that's one approach. This looks at an alternative way, which is it starts with what's working. Some people describe it as an appreciative inquiry approach. I like to describe it as a positive deviant approach. Now, a great colleague of mine, Antonio Belgrave, talks about this whole thing about positive deviance. And the school of thought of positive deviance is where ordinary people or institutions have found better ways or even extraordinary ways or solutions to existing problems or dilemmas without access to extra resources. Now, why I like that is it's going to find what's already existing within your context without having to change the circumstances. Where is it already flourishing? Where is it already working? It's that strengths-based approach. I think sometimes when we do this, especially this D&I work and the inclusion work, we're looking for always what's wrong. And I'm always curious with what's working and what could we learn from that? Because it's happening. It's happening within that culture. It's happening with those leaders. It's happening with those teammates. So why is it that it can work here and not somewhere else? So my curiosity is what's there. So, you're working within the same context. It's thriving for others, but not thriving in some areas. Focus on where it's thriving and pull back and learn from that. So the idea behind this is to look for stories. It's almost like capturing stories of inclusion. That's one intervention that's been used. There's how do you go out into your organization or your team or even in partnerships, where have we included? And get really granular around what made that difference, what was there, because there's always a common denominator, there's always some pattern that's there. So you can hear in the way I approach things, it's look for the pattern, see what you can do with it, learn from it and recreate it. But it's there. And I think the why this is so important is, remember I said to you, this diversity and inclusion work, and especially the inclusion work, it's continuous. And I think sometimes it's that thing of when you look for what's there, it kind of nourishes you to continue. It kind of like gives you hope. It kind of helps you see like there's some green shoots or it can be done. Because you remember, we're never getting to it ever being done or finished. You never get the final product. But if you can see where it's working already, it kind of inspires you to keep climbing. So it's almost like going out there and creating an intervention around collecting stories of inclusion. What do they mean? What do they tell us? But not just having them be something that you're going to analyze, share them, make them public, do a story week on sharing in stories of inclusion to help people think about, okay, what's happening in mine? What am I missing? What am I not seeing because I'm so focused on the deficit or what's missing? I just believe it sparks possibility and sparks momentum. I think look for what's working and learn about what's already here, what conditions have been created without no additional external input to actually make it happen. And that's why I said at the beginning, you could start with this and then bring all those other things in, it's just a way to begin. But don't forget to look for what's already working. I did this with a client where we just started stories of inclusion, and they've now got they're almost like creating like little mini books and it's here and it's here and it's here, and there's this sense of pride of found another one and this is why it's there. So they're out there doing the work rather than going with the tick board trying to look for what's wrong. It's just a different approach. And I'm not saying it's not important to look about what's not working, but start from here. Start from a place where you've already resourced, you've already got learning that can be shown with it across the organisation. The other thing I just want to say about this one before I come to an end of this is, because you've found those stories within that organisation or that team, people are often more open to actually believing that it's possible. Because some people say, yeah, but that's different. That was in that context. So when you're sharing stories about where you've seen it in other organisations, say, yeah, but yes, but when you look for them within, people actually say, oh, it's possible. It can happen here as well. So when I'm called in and people say to me, Ola, we want to do some work around really building inclusive cultures because it's not working here. We've got to change this. And this is what's not there. I'm like, okay, yeah, tell me some more. Then I'll ask the question, where is it working? Where do you already have stories of inclusion? And it's almost like this, you just see the person like almost like step back or lean back and like, okay, no, we're meant to be fixing something. And it's just it just starts the conversation in a different place. And I just believe it creates a pause point to look and appreciate and then step into almost like resource yourself to step into the next stage. But also what's great about this is it can be done by anyone. Anyone can go out there looking. You don't need some massive training to do it. It's like deciding what good looks like and going and looking for it. Stories of inclusion, where are they? The other thing, it gets people talking and they start to share. Oh, did you know? Ooh. So again, it's an intervention in itself. So that's the fourth one. So I've just showed you just 4 different ways that you could the key word is begin the conversation. I don't overlook the fact that I know it's complex. There's so many different contexts that are happening. There's so many different factors that probably have that pattern of inclusion that maybe clients want to change, that, you know, isn't what they want it to be. But my experience has always been start small, take one bite, learn from that, iterate, create something new. I was really influenced by the work of human system dynamics, where they talk about using adaptive cycles, which is looking about what's here now, asking that question of so what, and then moving into the now what in small cycles, and then you start again, keep iterating. That's what this work has to be in inclusion. Take a chunk, learn from it, explore, but also share this with others. Have people hold it and actually drive it forward. You know, sometimes as the practitioner or the OD person or the leader, we try and own it and hold it all. It can't be done. We're dealing with human behavior. This is what the crux of it is. This is the underlying piece. So the last thing I just want to say, it's almost like a bonus piece I just want to throw in, is you can have all those four, work on those, use those. But the one that has made one of the biggest differences for me, and I would definitely advise, is before you start having the conversation with others or helping the others spark their conversation and inclusion, build for yourself spaces and resources that really have you feel included, that challenge and nourish you in this work. You know, spaces that you keep learning, you keep expanding your learning edge. You know, don't try to do this work alone. If not, you're going to be climbing and it's just lonely. Have mentors, have learning sets, have communities, have supervisors, have thinking partners. People that you can vent with, people that you can say, could you just confirm my sanity on that? People who provide the type of generative listening that leave you feeling seen and heard. Confirm that actually there is a point for this. People that help you remind you of your why behind why you do this work. Sometimes, you know, it gets lonely on that mountain. People that remind you that it's nothing to fix. There's no one solution. It's constant climbing. People that remind you that not everything is a fight. People that remind you that it's not always about deficit. People and spaces where you feel included, seen and heard, so that you can go and recreate it for others, because it's a lived experience then. So my final note, inclusion is created one conversation at a time. Our role as leader, OD practitioner, even an advocate for D&I, is to host that conversation. So get curious, get creative, get listening, and get hosting. Thank you very much.
May I say a big thank you to you, Ola? I just really value that your presentation is so timely and relevant for the space that we found ourselves in, particular with the swing towards the far right. And however, what I really appreciate is, instead of doing the inclusion work from the deficit perspective, you ask us to, with compassion, do it from the abundance perspective, so that you can walk alongside with those people who may have never thought about those issues and yet willingly to engage in a conversation. So, like you say, change happens one conversation at a time. And may I encourage the viewer, please use this tool to support the change work you do. And Ola, one more time, may I say a big thank you to you. I'm grateful for your insight and practical gifts in this video. And to the viewer, thank you for watching the Just In Case video. And any feedback to us, we're welcome to hear from you. And keep well, keep safe.